I stepped onto the outside path that led past the kitchen. I walked past the rectory where we'd all met for luncheon. I followed the little path around the grounds. Eventually, I came to the side of the chapel. I stood back and gazed at the building, taking it all in. There was a pile of rubble next to the chapel, a blemish on an otherwise picturesque scene. Bits of splintered wood stuck out at odd angles, but they were rotted through. The stone itself was quite weathered as well. It looked perhaps as if an extension to the church had been planned but forgotten. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. Oh, hello there. Ah, Sister Margaret. I was just taking a stroll around the grounds. It's a good way to pass the time. Lots of nooks and crannies to explore around here. Yes, it certainly seems it. I find myself quite overwhelmed. I think I might know most of the interesting passages and doors and whatnot around here. It's a little boggling. But honestly, I doubt anyone here knows every little secret. If you find anything interesting, let me know. We can compare notes. I will. What's your favorite? I don't think I know you well enough to share that just yet. Oh, nothing against you. We can work up to my favorite. I can tell you my second favorite if you'd like. Go on then. If you ever get hungry in the middle of the night, there's a secret way into the stores through the cellar. Really? Where? Now, where's the fun in that? Fair enough, I suppose. It'll mean more if you find it yourself. Exploring this place is very enriching. You'll have a great time figuring it out, I promise. I'll keep it in mind. By the way, at luncheon, I'd like nothing more than to skip over whatever topic you were hoping to breach here. Ask me what my favorite psalm is, or if I play any instruments. Anything else. Do you play any instruments? I'm not too shabby at the lute, now that you mention it. Wow! I've never played any instruments. I imagine that's obvious, come to think of it. You should try it. Catherine would have shoved one into your hands the moment you stepped out of your cell if she was still here, I'd wager. Really now? It's more or less how it was for me when I got here. Hardly a minute after having my hair shorn, she was asking me all sorts of things. What I liked to do, what I wanted out of my life. Nobody got past her without trying something new. She sounds like she was very inspirational. She certainly had the stars in her eyes. May she rest in peace. May she rest in peace. Well, this has been as pleasant as it's been maudlin. Talk to you later, Hedwig. Until next time, Margaret. She gave me a quick bow of the head and continued off down towards the path I had come from. After taking another good look at the chapel, I looped around behind it. There, I could see rows upon rows of bushes and hedges, flower beds and vegetables. There were vines crawling up the walls of the buildings surrounding the vast network of plants. This was Darcy's domain, then. In fact, I could see her and Eustace besides the door to what looked like a large shed, or some sort of hall. I picked up my pace. At the very least, these two would be nicer to me than Flora was. Or so I thought. Eustace looked slightly irritated when she noticed me. She stood up and brushed herself off as I approached. Hello? I wanted to say thank you for the gift. Now's not a great time. What? Something wrong?
No, it's just, I'm busy.
I glanced at Darcy. I realized that she was looking even more out there than usual. Is she okay?
Yes. As long as I'm watching her anyway.
What is she? Darcy was pacing around in a small circle. Her head tilted skyward, and she looked blissful.
She's having a vision.
She's what?
Rows of bookshelves. Rows and rows of bookshelves. Rows and rows and rows of bookshelves. Hold on.
Eustace dipped down to pick up a small ledger and quill she'd been sitting with.
The reader chooses a book. It's a book the reader has not read before. The reader chooses a book and opens the book. What's in the book, Darcy? Ink lashes like flame, and they hurt the reader so, but the reader pays no mind. Readers read, and read the reader does, until the reader's eyes are burned, until every page is turned. Readers read, and read the reader does. Yes, keep going. Stay with me, Darce.
How can you be so calm about this?
She's had this one before. Readers read, and others ask. We ask the readers what they read, what they've read, what we need. Reading makes one wise indeed. Readers read and others ask, even if the flames do lash.
Eustace scribbled all of this down. She seemed perfectly collected. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. All of a sudden, Darcy stopped walking in her little circle. She began to wobble, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. Her blissful smile was gone.
This is new. What do you see now, Darce? What's happening? Fire. Yes, flames. You saw that. You said that already. Anything else? Goat. Fire. Goat. Fire goat. Forgot. I forgot what I was talking about. Just another one of your visions. I'd say that tincture was a success. Oh, good. Was it a nice one? It's hard to tell.
What's up, Pig? She touched her face and looked slightly surprised by how damp her cheeks were.
Was I crying because I saw the face of God and it was beautiful? Or was I crying because it was bad? We'll talk about it later.
Darcy? How long have you been having visions?
For a long time. We really need to be going. Yeah, I need to go sit down for a bit after having one of my vision tinctures, or everyone says I stay too odd. So, bye. I'll talk to you when I'm less odd.
Eustace took Darcy by the arm and coaxed her back toward the main building of the Abbey. I stood there, stunned. I had, of course, read about mystics, but I'd never dreamed that I would meet one, let alone see one in the middle of having a vision. I must admit that I had not pictured Darcy as being quite so close to God as that. It was a little humbling. Then again, if Marjorie Kemp could be so gifted, why couldn't Darcy? I spent some time alone in the garden. I could see rows of carrots, juicy-looking squashes, and plump parsnips. There were plenty of other things I didn't recognize, too. I realized just how limited my diet had been in my cell, and I salivated at the thought of trying some new food. The flower beds were quite beautiful, and a mix of pleasant smells filled the air. I took a little stroll through the flower bushes. There were all manner of colors and shapes that I couldn't identify. I stopped to smell a few, and they were all lovely. There was one awkward, spindly-looking bush at the end of one of the hedgerows that looked out of place. It was slightly skeletal. The leaves looked too big for the plant and seemed to droop a little. As I got closer, I realized there were little berries on the ends of the flowers. Against all better judgment, I reached a hand out, curious to see what they tasted like.
Don't touch that.
Goodness! You made me jump!
Sorry. I wondered if you were still in the garden and I came looking for you. I'm sure it's all very exciting, but Don't go touching things willy-nilly.
That was very rude of me. I apologize.
It's fine. Just don't touch that plant. Whatever you do.
Is it poisonous?
Extremely.
Why on earth is it here?
I'm no botanist. I can't explain properly, but the short of it is that it's useful in small doses.
How on earth could poison be useful?
Well, Moira says it can be used to make a good painkiller for one thing. It was Catherine the First, who begged Darcy to start tending it, though. Apparently, it's all the rage in Italy. You drop a little bit of the extract in your eyes to make them look bigger, I suppose. Shinier.
Oh, that's absurd.
You won't get any arguments from me, but that's why it's there.
Darcy really does a wonderful job with this garden.
She's brilliant. Darcy's our little Hildegard. Von Bingen? Sorry, is that someone that you...
Oh, no. Don't worry. I've read Hildegard.
That makes sense.
An expert with plants and a real visionary. Darcy's like her in several ways. In the companion discoveries of the Discord, I put direct links to a lot of the stuff that's been referenced here today. Hildegard, Marjorie Kemp, the translation of the Bible into English that they had problems with. What's the word that I'm looking for? John Wycliffe's Vulgus. Something V. An expert with plants and a real visionary. Darcy's like her in several ways.
That's right.
Is she... Vulgate, thank you so much. Doing well after all that?
She's fine. She tries to have him on purpose. She has all sorts of different concoctions she's been tinkering with to try and enhance and understand her visions for years.
Well, that's incredible.
It's certainly interesting.
Did Darcy know Catherine very well?
Catherine II, you mean? Yes. She thought Darcy was a genius.
How nice.
Catherine II had a way of making everyone feel special. Sometimes to a fault, if you ask me. She encouraged everyone to try new things, to see if they had hidden talents. That pudding you made
for luncheon was very nice, by the way. Was that?
Oh, no. That recipe's all me. Well, all me in my books.
I see. Well, it was delicious.
I'm glad. Anyway, my point is, Catherine II was someone who couldn't leave well enough alone. She had many admirable traits, and I miss her dearly, but it's true.
I don't follow. Eustace stared at me pointedly from behind her large glasses.
Be careful, Hedwig.
With that, she turned on her heel and left the garden. Beads of cold sweat were building on my forehead. I felt knocked entirely off balance. After a few moments of stunned silence, I staggered back through the flower beds toward the abbey. It was a little chilly outside now. It was getting later in the afternoon, and I presumed the dinner bell would be ringing at any moment. Eustace's words were still bouncing around in my head, and I had hoped that a meal might straighten me out the way that luncheon had earlier in the day. As I walked through the cloister, I remembered what the superior had said about the sword being left as something of a monument to Catherine. I stepped onto the cloister grass and walked up to the sword somewhat apprehensively. Be careful, Hedwig. What had she meant? Did she know? The sword was indeed clean. It looked well weathered, but there was no blood upon the blade. I dared not touch it, but I could tell that the edge was still decently sharp. Be careful, Hedwig. How many of them knew? If Eustace suspected I was up to something, surely she would tell the others. The secret might already be out there. I heard a rustle of wings above me. I jerked my head up to see, cloaked in shadow, barest glint of eyes. They disappeared into the shadows as soon as I was sure they were there. I scurried away from the sword, feeling a sudden rush of bravery. I started running towards the nearest staircase that might lead me to whoever had been watching me, and collided directly with Angela. I am so sorry. There's to be no running in the halls. Did the superior not tell you that? No. I really am sorry. What are you in such a hurry for, anyway? I was in the cloister, and I thought I heard someone watching me, saw someone watching me, so I was running to see who it was. Well, what on earth for? To see. I don't know. If they wanted to talk to me, perhaps? Of course. No one here seems to be able to resist your riveting conversation skills, I've noticed. What an exciting first day you've had. Has it been fun? Being paraded around like a daughter the Duke is desperate to marry off? Spare me. I can see right through your little act. I don't know. Well, I do. I know exactly why you've joined us all of a sudden. I'll take your silence as confirmation. You may have tricked the others, but I am no fool. If that's the case, then why haven't you told them? Because I do not care a whit what the others think. I just don't like meddlers, and I know a meddler when I see one. The superior may not care about how this place is run, but I do. I will not let her entrust this place to a complete outsider. What? I was at a total loss here. But at least now I could be honest in my confusion. You think I'm to become the next superior? I'm not even close to the most senior sister here, as if tradition matters here. Why else would you have been let free from your cell? Why else would you be taking meetings alone with her? I'm just learning to be the new chronicler. Yes. Oh, the superior seems to think chroniclers make good superior material. She is a fool, but a determined fool, I'll give her that. She cares a lot about this place. Clearly. Hence why she's set a mouse loose in the kitchen. She stalked past me, turning her nose up. I stood there, shaking with anger for a moment. I wheeled around as she reached the bottom of the stairs. Who killed Catherine? I know I shouldn't have asked so bluntly, but I felt confident enough in Angela's ignorance to barrel ahead. James Foreman, a nasty little stable hand who had eyes on her ever since he first started making deliveries to the Abbey. She rejected his advances, so he hacked her head off with the sword he carried in his cart for protection on the road. It was brutal, random, and obscene, like most crimes are. I cannot believe that. Well, you never met her. Why do you care? It's my job to care. Not yet, it isn't. I was fuming. But I did feel a little twinge of satisfaction realizing that I'd thrown Angela off my real reason for being here. I knew she was wrong about Catherine, though. There were too many strange things going on, and too much unsettling evidence to the contrary. Evidence like, I didn't actually have any evidence. Did I? I just had whispers. Whispers that were telling me that something was very, very wrong here. I had agreed with the superior out of a mixture of obedience and pity, but now I was itching to find the truth and to rub Angela's stuck-up face in it. Supper that night was a lot more subdued than luncheon. We all gathered around the rectory table, but the conversation didn't spark the same way. People seemed worn out from the various tasks of the day. Small clusters of chatter broke out between little groups of people across the table, but mostly people ate their meals in silence. I was content with this state of affairs, at least for the moment. Love this song. My plate was laden with wonderful-looking food from Darcy's garden, as well as a generous piece of chicken breast. I wolfed it all down in silence, trying to avoid eye contact with Angela, who was seated next to the superior at the head of the table once again. Sosolis' book on chess is supposed to be interesting. So I've heard. Eustace, do we have a translated copy? In English or Castilian, I mean.
I would have to check. I'll take a look and give it to you give it to you later.
Spectacular. After supper was vespers. You'll be glad to know I didn't cough up any horrible black bile in the chapel this time. We chanted the evening prayers. It all felt very regimented. There was a certain peace to the proceedings. My head felt pleasantly empty and soft afterwards, free of the confusion and the rage I had been alternating between earlier. When the office of Vespers was concluded, people trickled out of the chapel one by one. Left to my own devices, I wasn't really sure what to do. I followed everyone out of the building into the cloister, but nobody turned to ask what I was doing, if I'd like to join them, or anything of the sort. It felt like I had already ceased to be of any interest to the congregation. Invisible. I trailed behind everyone. I wasn't actually sure what I wanted. Did I want to be included? Would that make my job harder, or would it make it easier? Would it make me feel better or worse? Now, or when it came time to accuse one of them of the unthinkable, I looked across the cloister and stopped dead in my tracks. The sword was gone. I ran across the grass to where it had stood. It had been right there. I'd seen it. I'd nearly touched it. The sword is gone. Hello? Hello? I called out, but everyone had dispersed already. I looked down at the grass and then with jolt looked up at where I'd seen that mysterious figure earlier. Only they weren't there. I stared at the slight divot in the grass where the blade had been stuck to the earth for a little while. The superior! She had to be warned! Superior! Mother Superior, The door yanked open suddenly. Get in. Now. Are you quite mad? I will send for you when I am prepared to talk. If you're seen coming in and out of my office, it will... I know, I'm sorry, but this is really important. You're putting both of us at risk here. I apologize, but I'm making careful preparation so as not to rouse suspicions. Someone's taken the sword. The superior furrowed her brow. The sword. In the courtyard. It's gone. I saw it there this afternoon, and now it's missing. I know. You... Huh? I thought about what you'd said after luncheon about leaving a weapon lying around, and I decided that you were completely correct. It was more than a little ghoulish. I told our sacrist to take care of the thing not long after you left. Eustace? Yes. She's in charge of all the relics and items of interest here, and not just the books. Well, what if she's the killer? She's a wicked blade now. A sword that she could have gotten and collected anywhere she fancied, were that the case. Hedwig, leave the strategizing to me. There's nothing whatsoever suspicious about an abbess asking her sacrist to keep an object under her care. It makes absolutely no difference in the grand scheme of things if Eustace is involved or not. She would have access to the blade either way. Now, if the blade turns up missing, or, God forbid, gets used again, she'll be the first person to call on. please trust that I do think about these matters carefully. I like to play at least a few moves ahead. Moves ahead? What does that mean? It's chess terminology. Have you played chess before? No. I'll have Eustace loan you Solis's book on the subject. It's actually very interesting. I was well and bloody tired of hearing about chess, to tell you the truth. Anyway, you should go. If anyone asks, I was checking up on how your first day went. How did your first day go? I took a deep breath, raised my finger in the air, ready to let it all out like I had in my previous meeting with the superior. However, I thought better of it in the end. Fine, all things considered. Fine. Good. Angela doesn't trust you. Now there's the shock of the century. Anything else? No. Very well then. I shall send for you when I am ready to speak on these matters again, and to take you to visit the accused. Understood, Abbess. Have a good night, Hedwig. I left. I trudged up the stairs back to the dormitories. I pulled my robes a little tighter around myself. The wind was picking up outside. At the top of the stairs, I could see Eustace and Adela walking through the halls holding torches and lighting the sconces on the walls near the entrance to the dorms, the library, and the Misericorde. I was somewhat surprised. Oh my, who's going to be awake to snuff all of those out later?
We typically only do the ones up here. This hallway gets a bit of traffic at night. The dorms, the library, and so on.
Don't worry about the fires, though. We put them out before we go to bed. I nodded absent-mindedly and continued towards the dorms. I had had a long day. The energy I had received from the bath had almost been entirely spent. I had no idea what the other nuns were planning to do with their night, but all I could think about was my bed. I swung open the door to my little room and plopped, face first, into the straw mattress. My head hit the pillow with a thunk. Oh, really? What now? I flung my pillow aside to reveal a book. It had no title or any adornment on the cover. But when I opened it, I was greeted by a lovely illuminated title page. Medea. Transcribed proudly by Catherine II of Linbarrow Tor Abbey. For the enigmatic woman in the wall. May she find this most interesting and edifying. Despite its pagan origins, with apologies to Hesidius and Euripides in kind, I began to weep first, and then sob. Here it was, the play I had been promised all those weeks ago. Oh, I cradled it in my arms. I dared not turn past the title page, yet there was something that kept me glued to those words. Little words had been written just for me. Catherine's handwriting, while it was a little scratchier than mine, but it was full of character. I touched the page gently, running my finger across the page to feel the slight indents where the quill had pressed into the parchment. She hadn't broken her promise to me in the slightest. I thought back to that night she came to my window. How soon after that had she died? How long before Sowen had she planned to give me this? I knew from experience that transcribing anything was no simple task, even if a play was much shorter than the Bible. Oh, what a strange mixture of elated and despair I felt. I had a special gift from Catherine, but I'd never be able to share my thoughts on the story with her. I was left with precisely half of an experience, and I would never ever live the other half of it in all my days. It would have to do. Just knowing that Catherine had made this filled me with joy. As I dried my tears, I wondered, who had brought this here for me? Nobody knew that I had spoken to Catherine, surely, unless she had told someone while preparing the book. Did I have a secret ally? Someone carrying out Catherine's last wish beyond the grave? Or perhaps Darcy had been right, and I was about to meet a friendly spirit. I fantasized for a few moments about reading Medea alongside some sort of transparent, flickering vision of Catherine for a moment, but it was all too sad to keep up for very long. I didn't even know what Catherine looked like. And, well, ghosts don't exist, of course. I put my pillow back in its place and settled down. I couldn't read the play. Not just yet. The whole thing was just... well, it was sinking in still. I clutched the book to my chest, and I drifted off to a much-needed sleep. I awoke with a start, sometime later. I felt hot and uncomfortable as I rose from my bed. I was too tired and too overwhelmed earlier to think about removing my habit before drifting off. I carefully slotted the copy of Medea under my bedsheet and stepped out into the dormitory hall. Hello? Is everything all right out here? I spoke in a loud whisper, not wanting to wake anyone who may have also been trying to sleep. I got no response, however. I peered out into the second-floor hallway. The sconces still lit, flickering somewhat in the wind, and up ahead I could hear a door closing. People were still awake, it seemed. I sighed deeply. Was this the hazing the superior had mentioned this morning? Flora? Is that you? Margaret? Catherine? I could hear faint laughter coming from somewhere down the hall. Curious, I crept forward. I could definitely hear laughter and talking and what sounded like a lute being strummed. As I walked down the hall, the sounds got closer. I realized they were coming from the door next to the library. The Misericorde? I frowned. It sounded like there was a raucous party taking place behind the door. I was confused and a little hurt. I vaguely knew about the concept of the Misericorde from some of my reading. It was a room where the rules of St. Benedict were lifted, and the oblates could partake freely in red meat and pork and other delights forbidden to us in the refectory on certain holidays. Only half of the congregation was meant to be allowed in at any given time, and yet it sounded like a full-blown banquet was happening behind this door. And today was no holiday. I really wasn't part of the group, was I? I had half a mind to just barge in, but I turned around, startled. At the end of the hall, illuminated by sconces, was a tall figure, holding a sword. A black goat stood next to them, held by a rope leash. I wanted to scream, but I felt paralyzed. The figure wore black robes, cloaked in what looked like a nun's habit, only longer, without a wimple or cowl. They stood taller than any woman I had ever seen. And slowly the monster lifted their sword toward me, pointing with the blade, and as it glinted in the fire, I realized that they were wearing a large metal gauntlet. I took a step back, but as soon as I did, the apparition at the end of the hall thrust the blade they held into the air. With a rumbling rush of air, all the sconces in the hallway blew out. For a moment, everything was pitch black. The figure's sword suddenly wreathed in flame. I could see it once more. This creature and their pet were an even stranger sight, lit only by a flaming sword. In the red light of fire, their eyes glinted with an unholy sense of menace. Shadows danced through the hall as the mysterious figure slowly lowered their weapon again, bringing it to rest against the ground. After a moment, they dropped the leash they'd been holding in their other hand and raised a finger to their shadowed lips. The goat stood still, all the same. Assured of my silence, the apparition lowered their hand to the sword's handle. I didn't dare move or make a sound. I was absolutely in their thrall. Now, gripping it with both hands, they lifted the burning sword high into the air. Firelight flickered around the hall in an eerie pattern. And then they beheaded the goat in one swift motion. The fire was snuffed out, and I was plunged into purest darkness. Unable to bear it anymore, I finally screamed. Ah! I heard booming metal boots against stone. Fearful that this was the beast bearing down on me, I turned to flee, but I got tripped up in my habit. I stumbled to the ground, knocked my head against the stone so hard I could see stars. Oh, I groaned in pain and struggled to find my bearings, but I was quite dazed. After a few moments of scrambling, I realized there was a thin strip of light next to me in the darkness. As the sound of chairs scraping was heard, shadows began to pass over the bright line, and I recognized it was the candlelight leaking in from behind the Misericorde door. There was some panicked fiddling with a latch, and then suddenly the door finally swung open. A few of the sisters huddled around me, Adela holding a candle and looked by far the bravest of the group. "Hedwig, are you quite all right?" "Whatever's the matter?" "There's the intruder." I lifted a hand weakly to point down the hallway where I'd seen the ghastly apparition. Adela took a few steps in that direction, but I lunged forward to grab her frock. "No! They're armed." "Armed?" "Yes. There was a monstrous figure at the end of the hall carrying a sword." "What?" What should we do?" Marta and Charity appeared in the Misericorde's doorway.
Excuse my awful hearing, but did you say you saw someone with a sword?
"Oh, heavens above! I thought we were done with that sort of nonsense." Adela had tugged her robe out of my grip and was cautiously walking down the hall. I dragged myself to my feet and made to follow her, the rest of the sisters who had spilled out of the Misericorde in tow. "Tell me everything that happened, Sister Hedwig." "I heard a knocking on my door, and when I stepped out to investigate, no one was there. So I left the dormitories to see if they'd gone down the hall, perhaps, and then I saw someone at the end of the hall, and they were carrying a weapon, and they had a goat in tow."
Hold on. A goat?
"Yes! And then they raised their sword, and the torches blew out. Crumbs! I would have been scared out of me wits." "I was, and I still am."
"What happened next? I'm dying to know."
I suppose it must have been a he the more I think about it. He lit his sword aflame, and he beheaded the goat. But not before pointing it straight at me. It was a threat. It was leveled against me directly."
It beheaded a goat, you say?
Yes. This is a rather strange story, Hedwig. I understand, but you must believe me. We had reached the end of the hallway, which split in two directions. A large door to the surrounding wall of the abbey was open to our left, wobbling slightly in the wind and creaking softly. "And where did this swordsman kill the goat, Hedwig?" "It would have been, here. Just about." I gestured around myself in a circle, but as I looked at the stone floor, I realized there wasn't a speck of blood to be seen.
Uh-huh. Are you feeling quite all right, Hedwig?
You must have been seeing things.
No shame in it, mind. There's all sorts of odd things I'm convinced I've seen myself in the dark. And you're in an unfamiliar place, after all.
No! I saw it! It happened right here. Everyone was looking at me with a mixture of concern and annoyance now. Can we go? It's bleeding cold here. Adela's candle blew out. Everyone yelped. The door that had been easing back and forth in the nighttime air had suddenly slammed shut in the wind. The noise that echoed throughout the hall with bone-rattling power. Christ almighty! That just about took me poor heart out. Is everyone all right? I was quite shaken myself, but I soon realized that everyone else was chuckling. I'll admit it. That was a pretty good one, Hedwig. A good... absolutely fiendish. You're a very convincing actress. I was truly bewildered. In the darkness, I could just barely see Marta clutching her chest and catching her breath. But she flashed me an approving smirk. Catherine was attempting to center herself with deep breaths between exasperated chuckles, and Adela's face emerged from the darkness in front of me all of a sudden. She had her hands on her hips. She was looking at me in a mock fury. We must watch out for her in the future. What's going on out here? We heard screaming. My eyes were slowly adjusting to the darkness. I could see that some more of the sisters had emerged from the dormitories, some wearing night clothes. It's nothing to worry about. Hedwig just scared us all witless with a little prank. Oh, do tell. She gave the most convincing howl to draw us out of the Misericorde, and then cooked up some ingenious story to lead us down here and keep us occupied until the door slammed shut. Gave us all quite a fright. No! Oh. Hey, that's good. What did you use? String? Use? And there's not a trace of twine here. She must have known it bangs shut sooner or later in the wind. Or as a lucky guess. Hence the whole cock and bull storytelling once we got here. I see. You can spin a yarn, Hetty. I'll give you that. Not half. I really... That's impressive, Hedwig.
Hello. What's all this then? Are we having a party in the hallway?
The rest of the sisters had caught up. I realized that nearly everyone was here. Catherine, Flora, Adela, Marta, Charity, Margaret, Moira, Darcy, and Eustace were all clamoring around me in the hall, engulfed in an orb of candlelight. All except... Where's Angela? Probably busy seeing if she can fit an even bigger stick up her backside. Who cares? Consider it a mercy she isn't here, honestly. I'm not sure she'd find this so funny. I swallowed nervously. The narrative that this has all been some grand prank of mine had taken hold so hard and fast that I couldn't possibly push back against it. It was a happy accident, I suppose, given that it was clear as day. There was no blood at the end of the hallway where I had seen the goat beheaded, and there was no mysterious figure waiting for us brandishing a sword to chase. We should probably get you back to bed, lest the superior finds out you've been organizing practical jokes in the middle of the night. Yeah, she's been a bit touchy about that sort of thing lately. Oh, yeah. Although I'd expect she was more worried about us hazing the newcomer rather than the, newcomer hazing us.
Oh, that reminds me, Hedwig. Did you like my prank?
Your prank? Everyone looked at her as we walked back toward the dormitories in a huddle.
Yeah, I knocked on your door and then I ran back into my room.
A small titter rose up from all the sisters. Dearie me. Oh, silly.
Eustace didn't want me to, but I did it anyway. I was mostly worried you wouldn't make it back without being caught. I'm faster than I look. Or knocking something over.
It was very funny, Darcy. You gave me quite a scare. I forced a smile as best I could, but inside I was screaming. Were the knock and the horrid apparition two separate events? How was that even possible? It was hard to accept. Although, not half the one you gave us. We'd arrived at the Misericorde door, still hanging open into the hall. Flora, shall we continue our game? I had you retreating, if memory serves. Actually, I think you might have accidentally knocked over the pieces in confusion when we heard Hedwig scream. No! Ah! Oopsie daisy. I think I've had more than enough entertainment for the night, and shall retire to my dormitory. Likewise. Well, at the very least, no one needs to worry about snuffing out all the torches before bed. Everyone murmured in agreement. The group migrated back toward the dorms. Everyone was yawning by now. A few people said their goodnights to each other before retreating into their rooms. I mimicked these pleasantries as best I could, but my mind was completely elsewhere. I wanted to grab someone, anyone, by the shoulders and just scream at them that it had not been a prank. I had really seen a ghost, slaughtered in the hall, and that any missing evidence was obviously the work of some sort of witchcraft. I had half a mind to stop Darcy from going to sleep and ask her about what she had meant about the Abbey being haunted, or perhaps more importantly, tell her that her vision had been perfectly predicted what had happened. I stood in front of my door, arguing with myself, before finally sighing deeply and stepping inside. My mind was racing, but I couldn't ask anyone else to keep pace with me now. Not only was it quite late, but I'd narrowly, miraculously perhaps, avoided being branded a lunatic thanks to a lucky gust of wind. I flopped onto the mattress. I stared at the ceiling for a few moments, trying to work my breathing back down to a regular pace, trying to unwind the tight strings I could feel around the front of my mind. Rationally, I knew that I should sleep. Even after spending a significant amount of the day resting, I was dead tired. But how could I? What if they came back? What if they came here to... I really was tired. I really was very, very tired. This is good. We got about 10 or so more minutes. After what couldn't have been more than an hour, I awoke with a start and a yelp. After a moment, I realized I was sitting straight up in bed with my fists raised. Sleep may have taken me, however briefly, but I suppose I could at least take some comfort in the discovery that I would have been ready if any attacker had made their way into my room. Whatever good my skinny fists would do against a broadsword, at least. It was dead quiet, save for a light whipping of the wind and a few crows in the distant woods. My eyes adjusted to the darkness after a few moments. I steadied myself, and then crept out of bed, sliding my nightgown over my head. I wasn't going to be able to sleep, not until I could be sure I was safe from whatever horrid creature had menaced me earlier. I placed an ear to the door, just to check if my little squeak upon waking up had alerted anyone. Silence. The stone walls between us were quite thick then. Carefully, I opened my door. Mercifully, it wasn't excessively creaky. While there was a little moonlight leaking in through the threshold to the landing, it was far too dark to go exploring without a light. I remember Eustace and the others had been holding candles when they came to check on things earlier, so surely there must be... Aha! I hadn't spent much time in the dormitory's main room, and sure enough, there was a pricket holding a slightly droopy candlestick resting on the simple mantel above the fireplace. I held a hand in front of the iron hearth cover. I couldn't feel much warmth, but I had to try. The cover was quite heavy. I did my utmost to not make a sound as I pulled it out of the way, just enough to peer into the fireplace itself, and sure enough, a little gust of warmth billowed out. The fire had been banked with ash, just as I had done many times in my cell. Carefully, I stretched my hand into the fireplace to brush some of the gray dust off the embers before touching the candlestick to it. Eventually, the wick took, and I had a little light all my own. I nearly dropped my candle in surprise. A noise had come from one of the adjoining bedrooms. And terrified, I scrambled out of the dormitory as fast as I could, just as one of the doors swung open. I held a hand over the candlestick's flame in an attempt to hide the flickering light. I could hear hushed voices carrying out of the room into the hallway.
Darce! Darce! What? Where did I put my candle? Oh, I don't know. Damn it. I've got one here, hang on. Get here then. Honestly, what are you like? Very talented and smart. Not what I was thinking at this particular moment.
What's wrong?
Nothing.
A moment later, I could see orange light emanating through the threshold into the hallway. My breath was shallow and ragged as I tried to stay as quiet as possible, and I was still turned at an awkward angle to hide my own candlelight.
Come on then. Yeah, sorry. I thought I had heard something. Maybe it's the ghost. Ooh. Let's be careful what we joke about.
Who's joking? Eustace had no answer for this, and turned away from the landing back into the dormitory. I heard a few footsteps, and finally a door closing. As stealthily as I could, I left my hiding place and scurried down the hall. As quietly as I could manage, I moved through the hallway toward the spot where the apparition had emerged. I held for a moment as I passed the Misericorde, straining to hear if anyone was behind the door. If there was, I couldn't hear him. I continued onward, my heart beginning to beat out of my chest. What was I doing? The way I saw things, I was in danger no matter where I was. That thing could either kill me in my sleep or catch me out in the halls. I was woefully unprepared in either scenario, and perhaps more importantly, I had a wicked sense of curiosity about the whole situation. I padded over to the spot I was so sure I had seen the figure behead that poor creature, but just as before, no blood. The large door that had given us all a start was still closed, now merely wobbling gently in the lighter wind. Slowly but surely I walked toward the door, scanning the floor for any signs of blood, but there was nothing. I reached the large wooden door itself. Presumably, the swordsman would have had to have left through this doorway into the night to disappear after their hideous ritual. Curiosity got the better of me. With some trepidation, I slowly pushed open the door, hoping that its creaking wouldn't echo down the hallways too loudly. I wedged it open just enough to slip myself through, but oh, not again. The force of the door closing blew out my candle. Still rattled from the sudden sound, I retreated from the doorway. I stood in near-pitch darkness again, although this time I felt more irritated than terrified. Pale moonlight leaking through the main hallway was all I had left to navigate with. I held a hand against the wall and slowly walked back the way I came. The windows, running along the hallway that looked down to the cloister, finally came into view, so I at least had some inkling of where I was now. Heading away from the confounded door, I could see the path back to the hall that my cell was located in. I stood for a moment, taking it in. I felt a supernatural pull toward that old hallway. As I stepped closer, however, I could hear a strange whistling sound. I felt a chill run up my spine and decided that I would actually much prefer... I missed that one. Much prefer to go back to my room. I headed back to the hallway to the dormitory, past the library and the Misericorde. Out of the corner of my eye, however, I saw a black shape below the landing. There was someone in the cloister. I held my breath, and I watched as the figure paced around the grass. Their head was down, and I realized that they could not yet see me. They were looking away from the landing, although at what I couldn't determine. My heart pounding once more, I hid behind a pillar and poked my head around to watch. The figure stood still for a few moments more. A part of me I had never met bade me to stay and observe, too curious to escape just yet. Just who or what was this monster? With a dramatic turn, they suddenly left the center of the cloister and disappeared into the shadows around the edge of the lawn. At first, I squinted to try and make out where they were going, till a far more intelligent part of me realized that this creature could be heading up the stairs. I crept onward, quickly and quietly as I could, back to the imaginary safety of my bed. It was far too strange out in the halls at night. I made it back inside my small room without a peep. I let out a deep, relieved sigh. As well as feeling terrified, I felt a little embarrassed. My first investigative venture had ended without so much as a hint of a clue. But I was also terrified. I got onto the mattress once more, but I dared not shut my eyes. Instead, I sat facing the door and removed the candle from the pricket I held. The pitiful metal spike would have to serve as my weapon if that ghoul came to my door. They didn't appear. I sat like that, all night, clinging steadfast to my weapon and going over everything in my head. Before I knew it, morning came. I dutifully leapt out of bed and dressed as quickly as I could. As I pinned my cowl together, I mused over the best way to face the day, no, days ahead. I furrowed my brow and concentrated as hard as I could. The mist that had been lingering in my mind since the superior snatched me out of my cell was evidently there to stay. And if I were to make any forward progress on the task at hand, well, I'd simply have to deal with it. First of all, for the health of my own soul, I would strive to attend all services and meals, no matter how terrified I was. However I may have embarrassed myself on the day prior, it wouldn't do to give up on ingratiating myself to the others. And more to the point, now that I was no longer an anchoress, this is how I would maintain my worship. I could not compromise on this any further than I had already. Mysterious, demonic figures be damned. I would not let evil win. I had broken a sacred oath, but I would slip no further. This fear that I felt, this danger that I faced, so be it, I thought. Secondly, Angela was the only sister who didn't show up last night after I screamed. While it was quite possible that she was fast asleep or simply didn't care, but it was at the very least something that I could follow up on for whenever the superior next asked if I had any leads. There was plenty else swirling around in my head, but it would have to wait.